On the night the deck cycle turned live, this stopped being a story about another warning shot in the Gulf and became a story about how fast the United States can convert steel, fuel, radar, and trained crews into sustained strike power at sea. A Nimitz, or Ford-class carrier, is not just a ship weighing over 1,000,000 tons. It is a mobile airfield built to push more than 60 aircraft into a fight, backed by destroyers that can fire Tomahawk land attack missiles from the Mk-41 vertical launching system, while Aegis radars watch the air picture and track the next threat before it breaks the horizon. That is why the most dangerous moment is not always the first explosion on shore. It is the moment the launch rhythm begins to hold, when F-18EF Super Hornets with a combat range of 1,275 nautical miles, top speeds above Mach 1.8, and maximum gross weight of 6,000 pounds start leaving the deck in sequence, while escorts add another strike layer from the sea, and the entire formation shifts from presence to punishment. As one official Navy fact file puts it, in times of crisis, the first question leaders ask is, where are the carriers? And Vice Admiral Daniel Cheever framed the same logic even more bluntly when he said, everybody knows when that aircraft carrier is near, or even coming. What that means usually means we have a bigger air force than wherever we are. In other words, once that cycle is underway, the real issue is no longer whether force has arrived, but how much of it can be brought to bear before the other side can reorganize its defenses. What makes this build-up dangerous is not just the carrier itself, but the layered system around it. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer can move at more than 30 knots, carry a crew of 329, embark two MH-60R helicopters, and launch Tomahawk cruise missiles, SM-2 interceptors, and ASROC from the Mk-41 vertical launching system. In Flight 3 form, it also carries the ANSPY-6 radar, giving the strike group a stronger air and missile defense picture, while the carrier air wing handles the offensive side of the fight. That means the real question is not whether the United States can launch one wave, but whether it can keep launching wave after wave while protecting the ships doing it. A single carrier air wing can combine FA-18E, FA-18F, F-35C, EA-18G, E-2D, and MH-60 aircraft in one combat cycle, linking strike, jamming, airborne warning, and sea control into the same formation. As Vice Adm. Fred Catcher said, a US carrier represents the most advanced maritime capability we have. And that matters because once destroyers, radar, escorts, and aircraft are all working on the same clock, a naval deployment stops looking like deterrence and starts looking like a machine built for sustained pressure. The first real break in a maritime strike does not come when the loudest jet leaves the deck. It comes when the supporting aircraft begin tearing holes in the defender's awareness. The EA-18G Growler was built for that job. It carries a crew of 2, reaches speeds above Mach 1.6, and combines the ALQ-218 receiver system with the ALQ-99 tactical jamming pods to suppress enemy air defenses and disrupt communications. As the official Navy fact file explains, the aircraft is designed for enemy defense suppression missions, which is why a strike package becomes far more dangerous the moment Growlers enter the route ahead of the fighters. That is where the E-2D layer matters, even if it draws less attention on camera. The Hawkeye is the airborne node that turns a scattered formation into a coordinated one, tracking aircraft, ships, and missiles, while pushing the picture back to the strike group. Once electronic attack, radar coverage, and fighter escort are tied together, the fight starts shifting from raw firepower to timing. The goal is not just to hit one target, it is to force the defender to lose track of what is real, what is decoy, and what is already inbound. Pentagon officials have described carrier-based strike aircraft as giving commanders options. And in a fast-moving naval confrontation, that word means something very specific. More routes, more launch windows, more pressure points, and less time for the other side to react. The next escalation comes from weapons that do not need to cross the shoreline with a pilot in the cockpit. A destroyer using the Mk-41 system can push Tomahawk land attack missiles deep inland, while the same Aegis architecture supports standard missile interceptors for the defensive shield around the formation. The Navy describes Tomahawk as an all-weather, long-range, subsonic cruise missile for deep land attack, and USNI has noted a range of about 1,000 miles with a 1,000-pound warhead. That means a ship holding position far from the coast can still threaten command nodes, radar sites, air defense batteries, fuel storage, and runways without exposing the entire force to the same level of risk. That changes the geometry of the fight. Instead of forcing every strike package to fly straight into the strongest part of the defensive belt, the fleet can split the pressure between sea-launched missiles, carrier aircraft, and electronic attack. The result is a defender that has to cover more axes at once, spend more interceptors, and make faster decisions with less certainty. Once that happens, even a limited naval move stops looking like a patrol and starts looking like the opening frame of a longer campaign built on reach, timing, and repeated shock. The real danger grows when naval power stops being measured by one launch and starts being measured by tempo. A Ford-class carrier was designed to raise sortie generation by about 25% over the Nimitz class, which means the issue is not only how many aircraft are on deck, but how quickly they can be armed, launched, recovered, refueled, and sent back out again. When that cycle accelerates, pressure builds across every layer at once, from air defenses and coastal radars to fuel depots and command posts farther inland. That is why senior Pentagon officials keep using the same language about naval deployments. Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder said, "That's why we've deployed these additional assets, to give us additional options, to speed up timelines and, again, broadly, to ensure stability." In practical terms, that means a strike group can shorten the gap between detection and response, while the logistics ships behind it keep the formation moving with fuel, ammunition, and aviation support. Once that machinery is in place, the conflict stops being about whether Washington can reach the battlefield and starts becoming a contest over whether the other side can survive repeated cycles of pressure before its defenses begin to thin out. The other side of this equation is survival under counterattack. A carrier group is not built only to strike. It is built to stay in the fight, while missiles, drones, and aircraft are still in the air. That is why the U.S. The response in the region has repeatedly paired naval power with layered defense, including destroyers using Aegis, SM family interceptors, and added land-based systems such as THAAD and Patriot when the threat picture rises. That matters because a modern strike group does not win by throwing aircraft forward once and hoping the route stays open. It wins by keeping the air wing lethal while staying hard to break. The F-35C adds another layer to that logic, bringing sensor fusion, survivability, and targeting support into the carrier air wing, rather than relying on outside assets for every piece of the picture. The result is a formation that can strike, defend, and reassemble faster under pressure, which is exactly what turns a naval deployment from a show of force into a combat system designed to absorb the first blow and still keep launching the next one. What makes a naval surge like this politically dangerous is that it changes behavior before the largest strike is ever seen on camera. A U.S. carrier is not only a launch platform, it is a visible warning that the United States can bring a larger air arm into a crisis zone without waiting for host nation basing, runway repair, or diplomatic clearance to catch up. Vice Adm. Daniel Cheever put that logic in plain language when he said, "The aircraft carrier is very symbolic of America and is very, very much visible deterrent around the globe. Everybody knows when that aircraft carrier is near or even coming." In practical terms, that means deterrence is not just about what fires, but about what the other side cancels, delays, disperses, or hides once the group arrives. That is why this kind of deployment reaches beyond one patch of water. The Chief of Naval Operations said, "Be ready to fight and win today, while preparing for a bigger, more modern, more lethal force tomorrow." And that line matters, because a carrier group at sea is not operating in isolation. It is part of a broader system meant to constrain adversary choices, reduce miscalculation, and buy time for the next decision. When ships, aircraft, escorts, and airborne surveillance all enter the same theater, the effect is strategic before it becomes cinematic, because the map starts closing for the other side long before the first battle damage assessment is written. A surge like this also becomes more dangerous when it stops being a single national formation and starts overlapping with allied naval power, regional air defense, and shipping protection missions across the same theater. Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh said, 5 allied aircraft carriers are currently operating in the Atlantic Ocean and the North and Mediterranean seas, naming the French carrier Charles de Gaulle, the Italian carrier Cavour, the British carrier Queen Elizabeth, and the US carriers George H.W. Bush and Gerald R. Ford. That matters because once multiple carrier groups, escorts, and partner navies begin operating on connected timelines, the military picture widens far beyond one launch deck or one missile cell count. The operational effect is cumulative. A single carrier strike group already combines aircraft, escorts, helicopters, radar, and missile defense into one moving combat system. But a broader coalition posture adds more surveillance coverage, more refueling options, more escort depth, and more pressure on any force trying to threaten sea lanes. That is why Pentagon officials have repeatedly described carrier deployments as a way to provide additional capability and capacity and to stay ready for a variety of contingencies. In practical terms, that means the map gets harder to contest because the opponent is no longer tracking one force package. It is tracking an expanding web of decks, radars, escorts, and allied decisions that can tighten at sea faster than fixed defenses on land can adapt. The danger rises again when naval pressure starts touching the arteries that keep the global economy moving. The Strait of Hormuz is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, and the established shipping lane is roughly 2 miles wide in each direction, which means even a limited campaign of mines, drones, anti-ship missiles, or armed fast boats can turn a commercial route into a military bottleneck in hours rather than weeks. The Energy Information Administration has long warned that about 20% of global petroleum liquids consumption moves through Hormuz. That is why the strategic meaning of a U.S. naval surge is larger than the air wing alone. It is tied to whether Washington and its partners can keep enough sea space open for tankers, escorts, and commercial traffic while forcing the other side to spend missiles, boats, and mining capacity faster than it can replace them. President Donald Trump said he had asked about 7 countries to join a coalition to police the strait. And that quote matters because once the mission expands from strike power to traffic protection, the operation stops being a narrow military action and starts becoming a contest over oil flows, insurance costs, convoy security, and the credibility of freedom of navigation itself. So the real meaning of this build-up is larger than one carrier, one destroyer screen, or one burst of televised launches. It is a test of whether the United States can hold a moving strike network together across long distance, keep aircraft cycling, keep escorts alive under missile threat, and keep critical sea lanes open while the pressure keeps rising. Once that system is fully in motion, the battlefield is no longer defined only by the first target hit. It is defined by endurance, by sortie tempo, by missile depth, by radar coverage, and by whether the opposing side can still function after repeated layers of air, sea, and electronic pressure close in from multiple directions. That is why this story matters far beyond the Gulf. A force that can launch, defend, refuel, recover, and strike again without pausing is not just signaling strength, it is demonstrating a warfighting method built to turn distance into reach and presence into coercion. If you think this kind of naval power can still keep the region contained, or if you think it is already setting the stage for something much bigger, write your view in the comments. And if you want more breakdowns like this on carrier warfare, missile defense, and the real military math behind the headlines, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for the next one.